podcast. My name is Naz. We got some breaking news here. Nick Diaz, the brother of Nate, through his manager, talking to Ariel Helwani, has said that he's made a test cut from the range of 175 to 165. His manager also noted that Nick Diaz is 100% guaranteeing a return back to the fight game. He also talked about how Nick is going to closely watch the upcoming welterweight fights that are happening. Now, for those who are living under a rock, like I mentioned before, Nick is the older brother of Nate Diaz. And at the beginning of Nick's career, he was actually the one getting the big money fights. He was the one that was trash talking everybody. He started his career at a very young age with fights overseas. And the amount of trash talk, like I said, he was doing, and the way that he was able to back it up was one of the main reasons why the Diaz brothers gained a cult following like they have now. He just has this aura around him. And we can see that in some of his past fights, especially the ones later in his career. Last we saw of Nick Diaz was a fight with Carlos Condit in 2012, a fight with Jorge St. Pierre in 2013, and a fight with Anderson Silva in 2015. All three of the fights that I just mentioned were losses. All of them being unanimous decision losses. The last fight that Nick Diaz had was kind of an odd one. At some points in the fight, Nick was taunting Anderson Silva to throw punches. In some of his fights, even laying down on the ground. But what we remember Nick Diaz for was putting it on people. Both of the Diaz brothers being extremely cardio heavy fighters. And what I mean by that is that they use cardio in a way that really harms the other opponent. They keep this pace, they keep this unrelenting pace on their opponent, throwing multiple strikes. Most of those strikes just to touch you, peppering you, and hitting you with this overwhelming amount of pressure throughout all 5 rounds. Whatever pace that the Diaz brothers set for you in the first round is going to be the same exact pace that we're going to see in the 5th. There's no slowing down with this guy. Now, with Nick Diaz being in his advanced age, who is he looking at to fight next? Let's just go through the welterweight division. We got Kamaru Usman at number 1. We got Gilbert Burns at he's the number 1 contender. We got Kobe Covington after, Leon Edwards, George Masvidal, Tyron Woodley, Stephen Thompson, Damian Maia, Michael Chiesa. You get the idea. We're in the Shark Tank. And the fights that are coming down the pipeline that we know that Nick Diaz is going to watch closely. He's going to watch the Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns fight. He's going to watch the Kobe Covington, Tyron Woodley fight. Obviously, he's going to see if Nate can get a fight with Jorge Masvidal. And we know that Nick is going to be watching that fight really closely because obviously his brother is in that fight. And just to bring up his brother again, this thing that Nick has been really far away from the game and not training, I don't think I believe that narrative as much. Whenever you see Nate Diaz fighting, guess who's always lurking in the background? His brother, Nick. When Nate was fighting Conor McGregor, who was the first one to throw that bottle? It was Nick. Nick was right there. All of the fights that Nate has been involved, all of the massive fights that he's been in, Nick Diaz has always been in the background. Now, I don't know if he was training as much, but he must have been in the area that Nick was in. Like, I mean, he must have been there at least, sometimes walking in and out of the gym. Now we see Nick here making this weight. The video that was posted by Ariel Helwani, just watching this, we see Nick Diaz in supreme shape. And the one thing that I really like about Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz is that they don't really get out of shape. Once they're outside of the UFC, they're doing triathlons, they're swimming with sharks, they're doing all this crazy stuff. They're never really out of shape. So yes, it's great that he's able to make the 175, 165 pound weight limit, which he's obviously trying to hit the welterweight division. But I don't think this was as big of a deal for him as we're making it out to be. His body has adapted to the crazy things that he does. Now, we did see photos in the past that Nick looked pretty big in. But he's a professional. He understands the ways to get his body back into shape. I also wanted to note that, Nick was out of the UFC, but was it really what he wanted? There was a string of issues that he dealt with. And they weren't really up to him. In some cases, some of the issues that he had, I believe it was from marijuana, those issues are not really that big of a problem these days. We got different fighters coming out saying how the UFC and USADA have really toned it down. They have instructed all the fighters on the best ways to work with USADA. I think this will be a big help for Nick. Whatever he wants to do outside of the UFC is whatever. But now he knows how to deal with the UFC and USADA. So that won't be that big of an issue for him. And I think it's one of the main reasons why he's so keen on coming back into mixed martial arts. So I rattled off all these names in the welterweight division. Now, out of all those names, I think I sit here and think, and I go, do I want to see him versus all those guys? Or do I want to see what Nick Diaz has left? And Aaron Bronstetter of TSN tweeted out a suggestion on who Nick could fight first. And I thought it was a great suggestion now that I think about it. It's Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler just coming off of a fight with Neil Magny, losing it. He's in his advanced age as well. They have fought before. So I just think this fight makes a lot of sense. Who knows when Robbie Lawler wants to come back? I think that Nick Diaz wants to come back late 2020, early 2021. And we all know that Robbie Lawler likes to scrap. He might take another fight before the year ends just to get that taste out of his mouth, because he has lost 3 fights now. But in my opinion, I think the best thing for him to do is pump the brakes, reconfigure, and see if Nick Diaz is down to fight. I think the sport gets a lot more interesting when you got figures like Nick Diaz coming back. There's a bunch of storylines that you can do with Nick. You know, I like this Robbie Lawler fight that I just mentioned. But since his brother is fighting in the same division, you know, sometimes he moves back and forth between 155 and 170. I really like the storyline of Nick Diaz coming in and defending his little brother. I could see in the future, if Nick gets a couple fights under his belt, maybe fighting some big names that Nate has. Just a great storyline to itself. And then on top of that, you got a guy that is willing to talk on the mic. You know, sometimes he does say some weird stuff, like yelling out Stockton multiple times, confusing his opponents. But I think that's who Nick Diaz is. And he just makes the sport fun. Having figures like him just elevates the sport. Now, I think this new generation of fans don't really know who Nick Diaz is and what he's done in the sport and what he has done for the sport. But this might be a perfect opportunity for them to learn. This might be a great way. They get introduced to a figurehead in the sport. I think that's the perfect thing to call Nick Diaz. He's a figurehead in the sport. I could see some real money fights with Nick Diaz. And the potential of him coming back that the UFC has is great. And I just hope that he's able to string some wins along, get his feet under him. Because here's another thing. If Nick Diaz does fight late 2020 or early 2021 or whenever he wants to fight, will there be fans involved? I don't think so. I don't think fans will be involved anytime soon. You might get those mini crowds like we've seen on Fight Island. Even though they say that no fans are involved, we still have guests in the building, like princes and princesses and all that kind of stuff. So maybe we'll have small crowds, a little bit bigger than what we're seeing in Fight Island. But will Nick Diaz be able to adapt to that? And that's a question for all fighters. It's not just a question in particular to Nick Diaz, but this is a question to all fighters. But Nick really loves the crowd. Really loves the crowd. And just to bring that point up leads me to think about how the sport has evolved since the last time he fought, which was 2015. It's funny because he fought in 2012, then he fought in 2013, and then he fought in 2015. So there was even a gap between his last two fights. The sport has evolved in many ways, many countless ways. We've seen kids just grow up watching mixed martial arts. Like I said, there's many ways that the sport has evolved, but I think that the main way, and just to wrap it all up, the main way I would say that the sport has evolved is that kids have grown up watching MMA. It's a part of the sports landscape. In many ways, when Nick Diaz started fighting, he started as a boxer or a jiu-jitsu person. I forget which one it was. But he started in one discipline, like many of his peers at the time, starting in one discipline and then bringing in coaches for other ones. But kids these days, like Chase Hooper, Sean O'Malley, all these young guys, they grew up watching mixed martial arts. They didn't grow up to be a boxer. They didn't grow up to be a jiu-jitsu specialist. They didn't grow up to wanting to go to the Olympics for wrestling. They grew up wanting to be a UFC champion. So when they train, they don't just train boxing or jiu-jitsu. They train MMA. That's the main difference that I've seen in the sport today as opposed to when Nick Diaz was dominating. It's great, fun news that came out. Amazing to see Nick Diaz come back. You know, it's always great to see a person's fire reignite. It's just great to watch. And it's going to be a lot of fun to have him in the sport, especially in this new era. Imagine his trash talking in comparison to the new generation. It's going to be great. So I really appreciate you guys listening. Thank you for taking the time. And if you guys could please like, subscribe all that fun stuff on all the platforms that this podcast comes out. I really appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day and listening to this podcast. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.